Great, thank you very much. To get everybody onto the same page while we start talking about waste, let me get a sense. How many people in the audience recycle their waste? Not bad. How many of you generate waste? Okay, fantastic. So we've all got something in common. So what I'm going to be speaking about today is probably about 5 research projects which the Waste for Development group at the CSIR has conducted over the past few years to try to understand the South African waste sector and the opportunities that it provides for a country moving forward. So just the outline of the presentation. What is this waste sector that we're talking about? What are the opportunities that it provides, whether it be economic or social opportunities? And how do we unlock these opportunities, whether it be through enterprise development or whether it be through policy support or policy development? So what is the South African waste sector? It's valued at around about 15.3 billion rand, which is around about 0.5% of South Africa's GDP, in line with what most countries spend on waste services. Employs around about 30,000 people, of which 2/3 of those work within the public sector, within local government. But there's an estimated 2 to 3 times that number that earn a livelihood through the informal sector, through picking through your curbside bins when you put your wheelie bin out on a Tuesday morning, or picking off of landfill sites. We generate an estimated 108 million tons of general and hazardous waste, of which sadly only 90%, of which 90% goes to landfill. Only 10% is recycled in South Africa. And every year we lose an estimated 17 billion rands worth of resources to the economy by disposing of them to landfill, by putting them into a hole in the ground. While our recycling industry is certainly growing, we are increasingly losing valuable resources by exporting these waste streams to overseas markets. The South African waste sector provides an opportunity, first of all, to recover valuable materials and return them back into the local economy, into the manufacturing economy, and to strengthen our local economy in South Africa. It has the opportunity to create new jobs in what we consider as an emerging secondary resources economy by looking at waste as a secondary resource, creating job opportunities for particularly low-skilled unemployed citizens. With very low barriers to entry, we can establish new enterprises, including cooperatives and SMEs, and ultimately around stimulating a green economy in South Africa. And if anyone has had the opportunity to go to a landfill site in South Africa, these are the kinds of images that you see, with valuable resources, PET bottles, plastic, cardboard, valuable material being disposed of to our landfill sites. Some of this is recovered. PET is particularly an attractive waste stream. Around about half of our PET that we consume, the Coca-Cola bottles, for example, the water bottles that you drink from, around about half of those bottles are recovered and reintroduced back into a manufacturing economy. But in terms of the tonnages of waste, this 108 million tons, this is the first of the projects which the CSR conducted for the Department of Environmental Affairs to try to quantify the tonnages of waste that are generated in South Africa. 108 million tons in total, 59 million of those are general, 48 million considered unclassified, and 1 million hazardous. As I said, 90% of that goes to landfill site. And one has to question, why is that the case? If you look at what is produced on the graph over here, around about 60 to 70% of the waste that we generate has potential value in terms of either going back into a recycling economy, or particularly around the organic waste that we produce. Our biomass waste, for example, is the single largest general waste stream produced in South Africa. There are opportunities to recover, for example, biogas, or to convert that biogas into electricity. And moving up the waste hierarchy, in other words, moving away from landfilling towards reuse, recycling, and recovery, creates social, economic, and environmental opportunities for South Africa. But we always ask this question, so why should South Africa do anything other than put it into a hole in the ground? Unlike Europe, for example, we still have plenty of space. Africa's a big country, or South Africa's a big country. Yes, our landfill sites in the cities and towns are reaching the end of their life, but we could move outside of our towns if we wanted to landfill. Landfilling is still very cheap in South Africa, so why would we want to pay 4 to 5 times the price to do something else with it? And so we said, well, let's start to understand what the economic impacts and opportunities are of waste management. And this brought us to the second study, which we did for the Department of Science and Technology, which was around understanding the economic opportunities of moving waste away from landfilling. And in terms of the value chain, this would be you down over here in your house. There are people that collect it, it moves into a recycling economy, it moves into a downstream processing economy. And we took 13 different waste streams produced in South Africa, using the data that was prepared for the Department of Environmental Affairs on the tonnages of waste, and based on typical prices, the unit values that were being paid for these materials, we started to look at what were the value of these resources. We ran it for 4 different scenarios. Scenario 1 was the status quo as at 2011 in terms of how much we were currently recovering then. Scenario 4 would be a case of if we could recover 100% of all of the waste that we produce, what would be the value? The DST goal is the goal of the Waste Research Development and Innovation Roadmap of a 20% diversion of industrial waste and a 60% diversion of domestic waste away from landfill by 2025. And scenario 2 is the typical targets we see in the industry plans for the sector. And what we found, if you had seen the bottom row of that table, was that South Africa generates at least 25, and this is a conservative figure, at least 25 billion rands worth of resources as waste. That is viable polymer, viable fiber, metal, glass, organics, which could be reintroduced back into the South African economy. As at 2012, 17 billion of that was still being lost. So in other words, there was some recovery of that value. Typically the cherry picking of the high valuable materials like the PET, the aluminium cans, the white paper and cardboard, for example. What we also found, particularly when it comes to plastic, for example, is that material recycling has a 10-fold greater economic benefit for the country than putting plastic, for example, into waste to energy. And there's a lot of debate and tension at the moment in South Africa in terms of introducing high-temperature waste to energy to deal with our waste streams. What we also found is that the unit value, in other words, what people were prepared to pay for these waste streams, was often greater than the price of landfilling. And so it leaves you with this question of saying, well, then why? It doesn't make sense why we are still continuing to send 90% of the waste that we generate in South Africa to landfill. If you look at this picture over here, viable polymer, plastic, that's just sitting there. Why would we want to transport oil from halfway around the world to South Africa to produce new plastic, while at the same time we're putting plastic into our landfill sites that could be reused? Fortunately, and I put this in brackets, fortunately we do have pickers on landfill and on curbside who are recovering these materials. And it's estimated that around about 70 to 90% of the recyclable post-consumer packaging is in fact sourced from this informal sector. Now I say fortunately because this is by no means the kinds of jobs that we want to be creating. This is not a livelihood that we would want people to be conducting. If we didn't have informal collectors at curbside or on landfill, that figure of 90% would in fact be a lot higher. So waste does provide social benefit and economic benefit to the country. And this is particularly relevant for South Africa right now. If you look at the first quarter statistics for South Africa, quarter 1 of 2015, our unemployment rate was sitting at 26.4%, the highest in 12 years. If you take the expanded definition of unemployment, in other words, people who are eligible to work but have chosen not to work, that figure increases to 36.1%. That means 1 in 3 South Africans are currently unemployed. To add to that problem, according to Stats SA, around about 60% of those that are unemployed have less than a high school qualification. And recent figures that we've seen for the informal sector is in fact around about 90 to 95% of the informal sector currently collecting recyclables have a secondary education or less. So South Africa sits with the problem of having high numbers of uneducated, unskilled, and unemployed citizens, which leaves us with this twofold challenge. The first part of this is around creating large numbers of low-skilled jobs to deal with the current unemployed. The second is around growing South Africa's economy to create new job opportunities. And the waste sector is a sector that can offer solutions to both of these. It can absorb low-skilled employees, and it also provides an opportunity to grow this entire new secondary resources economy to, for example, process electronic waste or to process plastic that can absorb and create new jobs. The immediate opportunities, for example, open spaces cleansing. I'm sure we've all seen the amount of illegal dumping that happens in our cities and towns, and municipalities spend millions of rands every year just cleaning up illegal dumping. There are opportunities in waste collection, in sorting of recyclables, and these are labor-intensive activities that require low skills, as I said, low barriers to entry. And it does provide opportunities for small businesses and for cooperatives, which takes us to a recent study that we've just completed for the Green Fund for the Department of Environmental Affairs, which was around looking at the opportunities that cooperatives provide as a developmental mechanism in South Africa. This is a graph published by the Department of Trade and Industry on all of the cooperatives that have been registered in South Africa since the function was transferred from the Department of Agriculture to the DTI. And you can see since 2002, we've had exponential growth in the number of cooperatives that have been registered in South Africa. So it's a developmental mechanism that has very strong policy and government support in terms of job creation and enterprise development. But what we've found through this research is that while waste and recycling cooperatives have the potential to create significant income opportunities, and while they are a developmental mechanism with strong policy support, the results show that cooperatives face numerous challenges. In fact, around about 92%, in other words, 9 out of every 10 waste and recycling cooperatives that register will fail. They have not been integrated into municipal solid waste management systems. So they operate on the fringe of waste management. They sort, for example, under freeways and bypasses. Many of them live on the streets while they're collecting. Creating sustainable waste and recycling cooperatives requires long-term support, and this is not just around training. When we spoke to the cooperatives, they said, we need training, we need training, we need training. But the training is happening. The problem is that because of the fact that we are forcing people into cooperatives, many of whom don't have a secondary education, the training is largely going over their heads. We're trying to take people and make them run businesses. So this requires incubation, it requires mentorship, it requires walking the road with them to create sustainable small businesses. And so if there is this economic value, as we've seen from the economic study, and if reuse, recycling, and recovery provides opportunities in terms of job creation and enterprise development, the next aspects that we looked at was in terms of saying, well, then what are the possible policy instruments that we could use to unlock this opportunity in South Africa? But very importantly, we need to understand the appropriateness of these instruments. We can't necessarily just plug and play a European Union policy instrument into South Africa and expect it to work. And there have been two particular policy instruments under development that we've had the opportunity to research. The first is around economic instruments, incentives and disincentives, and around extended producer responsibility. And this project was undertaken for the Department of Environmental Affairs, where we looked at a potential suite of economic instruments that could be introduced into South Africa, all the way from resource extraction and, for example, taxes on virgin materials. So in other words, taxing the extraction of virgin aggregate to make construction and demolition waste a viable alternative material in road building or alternative building material, all the way through various product disincentives to, at the top part, kind of pay as you throw. There is no incentive for you as a household to put less waste in your bin because you pay the same rates and taxes every month, whether there's one small bag at the bottom or whether the bin is overflowing. There's also opportunity to introduce a number of incentives on the other side, so to incentivize recycling behavior. So alternative policy instruments that we found provide an opportunity to shift this responsibility, the financial and operational responsibility, for the treatment and disposal of selected products, essentially away from government towards the producer. Producers who are producing packaging or producing iPhones, computers, fridges, washing machines, have a responsibility to take those products back again at their end of the useful life and to make sure that they're recycled. It absolutely relieves municipalities of some of the financial burden that they're currently carrying to deal with your and my waste, but essentially to deal with the producer of these materials wastes. It provides financial incentives, also importantly, to incorporate issues such as design for the environment, that we don't produce green PET bottles with pink spots because you can't recycle a green bottle with pink spots. So how do we force producers to design products that are designed for the environment, that are easily recyclable? Also to subsidize alternative waste treatment in South Africa against this backdrop of very cheap landfilling. Many municipalities in South Africa don't charge for the disposal of waste to landfill. You can't even compost organic waste competitively in a situation like that. So to wrap up on these various studies that the CSIR has had the opportunity to do research on for various national government departments, the research that we've conducted, both quantitative and qualitative data sets, has really come together to tell a story of a waste sector that provides considerable social, environmental, and economic benefit for the country. We've had the opportunity, by collaborating together with, for example, Department of Environmental Affairs and the Department of Science and Technology, to undertake many first-of-kind research projects for South Africa, like the Waste Sector Survey, like the Value in Waste project. And I think going forward, in terms of the implementation of the 10-year Waste Research, Development and Innovation Roadmap, which is championed by the Department of Science and Technology, the CSIR is committed to extending this research into a whole host of new areas of research. I always say research in waste management is like a blank slate. It's a very young, emerging area of research, and there is so much opportunity for innovative research and innovative technology development in the space. So I will thank you, and I'll leave you with that.